G'day, my name's Aussie Timmy. I'm a member at Detail Paradise Forums and I'm also a professional photographer. Wanted to try and share a few tips with how to take photos when detailing cars, because some of it can be fairly tricky. This weekend I'm detailing a white VW Golf, which is a perfect candidate because white is one of the harder colours to shoot, especially in bright sunny days or trying to focus on swirls. So yeah, I want to take you through a few tips, both with the cameras themselves and also post-production on a computer. I've got a few different cameras to play with. I've got a fairly cheap point and shoot. I've got a bridge camera, which is about $500, and then I've got a couple of digital SLRs to play with. So yeah, let's get cracking. Okay, so the range of cameras that I've got to play with today is a Canon point and shoot. I've got a Canon SX40 bridge camera. I've got a 40D with a entry-level lens, and I've also got my Canon 1D with top-of-the-line lens. Now, I don't expect that everyone's going to have access to a 1D with L-series lenses, which is why I'm going to focus mainly on these three cameras. I want to try to get people to be able to get better photos with a point and shoot if that's all you've got, a bridge camera if you can afford a bridge camera, or for those who have digital SLRs like this one and just want to know a little bit more about how to get better photos with it. And the first thing that I want to start by talking about are the filters. It's a question that comes up for me from time to time. So I've got a range of filters here, and I'll go through and talk about them. So first one that I've got is the circular polarizer. Now this filter is a tinted filter, and it's made up of two components. So it's like this, and it's made up of two components. It's got a front and a back that can rotate independently to each other. The next filter that I'm going to talk about today are the UV filters. Very common, lots of people have a UV filter. Also going to talk about a HD filter, and last of all I'm going to talk about an ND filter and all the differences for them. So first of all, I'll start with the non-tinted filters. So we've got the UV filter, which is very common. It's just a clear piece of glass. Not much to it, doesn't rotate or anything, it just simply screws on. And then we've got the HD filter here, which is almost identical. To the naked eye, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Now the difference between these two is that this filter is going to filter out UV light. This filter filters out nothing. Its HD filter is just a hardened piece of glass that is used to protect the front of your lens. Lots of people buy UV filters and put them on their camera lenses for that reason, and that's the reason that I've got both UV and HD filters. I don't use both on the same camera, I just use one or the other. I started out by buying UV filters, but once I'd done a bit of reading and research and people think that there's not much difference, for my next camera, for my next lens I should say, I ended up getting just the HD glass. It's just something to put on the front of your lens. It just simply screws on. And what that does is that, you know, when you're out and about, you might get some grime on there, you might touch it with your fingers accidentally, you're going to get dust on there, especially when I'm shooting air shows and plane competitions. I'm going to get fuel contaminants build up and just like a oily film on my lens by the end of the day. And the good thing about this glass is you can clean it and not be worried that you're actually damaging the lens. So if I scratch this, I'll just buy another one and put it on. Much cheaper for a filter than it is for a new lens. Now, you have to be careful with filters. If you just go and buy the very, very cheapest filter that money can buy, you'll find that it's not as clear as what you would like, and you'll lose a bit of quality in your photos, which is why I go for the Hoya Pro 1 series of filters. I'm dropping them everywhere, but I'll show you there. It's a Hoya Pro 1D. They're fairly expensive. They're about $100 a filter. To some people, that's out of their range. Now, Hoya's other filters are pretty good. Hoya is a good brand. There are other good brands as well, but Hoya's the one that I stick with. But if you go for like your super cheap ones from eBay, you may be losing some of your image quality. You know, you get a lens that's a couple $1,000 and you're going to strap like a $10 filter on the front of it. You know, like there's no point. In saying that, not everyone can afford to spend hundreds of dollars on filters, so certainly the filters around the $50 mark in the Hoya range are not bad. So that's the difference between a UV filter and the HD filter. Would I recommend getting one? Yes, definitely. Whether it's UV or HD, I don't think it really matters. You do some researching on Google. Some people reckon that the UV filters are bad for your digital SLR because of the sensor, the way that the light gets to the sensor, but I think it's much of a muchness. I can put either of those on my camera and I can't tell the difference. I don't know which filter I've used because both of them are just there to protect the glass. So that moves us on to, I'll explain the ND filter because again it's another single stage filter which I haven't even opened yet, so I haven't opened this particular one. But this is just a single stage filter that's tinted. Now ND means neutral density, and what that's going to do for you is it's going to just reduce the amount of overall light coming into your lens. And the reason that you may want to do this is, for instance, when I'm doing car-to-car photography, so I've got a rig on my car and I want to take a photo of another car, I want to have a nice long exposure so that I get the background blur and I get the wheels spinning and things like that. But if I have a nice long exposure on a really bright day, it's going to overload the sensor. The photo's going to be like overexposed and washed out. So an ND filter is just a single stage filter, exactly like, looks like a UV filter, but it's tinted. And all that's doing is just simply reducing light coming into the lens. I don't think it's very applicable for what we do. I don't think you'll need one. But just in case you read about ND filters, that's what it's for. Now this is the filter that I think is going to interest people the most. It's the circular polarizer. So this circular polarizer is made up of two elements, a front and a back. It's only one piece of glass, as far as I'm aware, but it's got a rotating ring on the back. So again, it just goes onto the front of your lens. Another thing to be aware of is that filters come in different sizes, so this lens is going to take a different size filter to that lens, so you need to really buy the right filter for you. So this filter goes on the front. You need to grip both sections to actually tighten it onto the lens, but then once it's on, the front piece will rotate separately. If I can tighten the back piece up, that'll be good. The front piece will actually rotate separately to the back piece. And what that's going to do is it's going to change the angle, change the light of what light, is being let through the filter into the lens. And I'll show you exactly what that's going to look like through the camera live shortly. So that's all well and good for the digital SLRs. But then you start to get down to these and you say, well, how am I going to fit a filter to this camera? And the answer is you won't be able to fit them to all of them. Some bridge cameras like this one, you think, oh, I could probably get a little mini filter, but it doesn't actually have a thread on the inside there. It looks like there's a beveled edge there that looks like it's got a thread in it, but it's not. But what people do make are adapter rings. So I got this on eBay. It was like $5 delivered from China or Hong Kong or somewhere. But this just simply goes on and rotates, locks into place. And now I have the ability to take my circular polarizer and fit it to this camera. Easy. So now I have a circular polarizer on this camera. Obviously I can't fit my lens cap to this filter, but it will at least let me use it for the time being. The good thing is that once I take the filter off, I can still put the lens cap on inside the adapter ring. So then it comes down to this little boy. It's like, well, how do I fit a filter to that? You can't. really. It's not designed for that. Doesn't mean we can't use one though. You know, like if you've only got a car that's being particularly difficult, say you only have trouble with white cars, but most of the time you're using your camera fine, it's no big problem, but you just need it for white cars. You still pick up like a $50 filter or something like that and turn your camera on, and the filter will still work if you just put it up against the front of the camera. You can still get that same effect, and you can still rotate it around, you know, just with your hand to change the angle of light that's being let in. It's not ideal, I'll be honest, but it's a start. So that basically covers off filters. I'll talk more about circular polarizer while it's fitted to a camera, and show you live the effects that the polarizer is going to have, and why that's going to help us on a bright car. Yeah. Okay, so here is the white Golf that I've been detailing this weekend, and the sun's come out and you can see that it's very bright, and something that people complain about a lot is the ability to photograph white cars in this bright sunshine, because the glare just sort of washes everything out and makes it quite difficult. So what I'm going to do is we're going to put a circular polarizer on the camera, and we're going to have a look at the difference that that's going to make. First of all, let's just take a photo without the polarizer. Alright, now we're going to put the polarizer on. Alright, let the camera readjust. Now, the thing with the circular polarizer is you can rotate the front filter to adjust your highlights and shadows how you want it. You can see it moving across the car there. So you set it to where you want it, so probably make the side that's in direct sunlight the darkest so that it's not washed out as much. And now when we go to take a photo, now it should be a better photo with less blown out whites than what we had before. So the circular polarizers are pretty cheap, and they'll make quite a difference to the end result. Okay, so a circular polarizer is going to be one way that we can reduce the effects of harsh sunlight on like a white car. The other way that we can manually control our cameras to deal with the situation is by using the camera's ability to overexpose or underexpose. Nearly every camera has it, but the only thing is that you can't use your camera in full auto mode to do it. However, usually there's another mode that is quite usable. So you can see on this camera here, green auto, this one here, is the really basic, you do everything for me mode. But then we go to P, which is program. Now P still is going to automatically decide, you know, on your shutter speed and things like that. But it does allow us to do a couple of custom tweaks. So if I turn it on, change it to camera. So now I'm in program mode. See this little button here with the plus minus on it? If I press that, it gives me the ability to over or underexpose the image. So plus is obviously overexposed, so everything's too bright. And then as I move down the range, you can see the image is darkening. So what that allows you to do is, normally it'll just be set to 0. But if you're finding that the shots are so bright that the whites are just, you know, glaring off the car, like the sun's just glaring so much, you can actually just darken the whole image a little bit, just to whatever makes the whites not so bright. It will darken the background a little bit, but that's not such a bad thing, you know. It's going to make your car punch out of the background more without it being washed out, because the contrast will, you know, the background being dark isn't going to be a huge issue. It's just going to make the car stand out. So try using that. What I've done is, with each of these cameras, I've taken a series of shots. So if I go to the replay mode, so you can see how the car gets progressively darker. This is not using a polarizer or anything, this is just standard. So in that shot the whites are really white and there's a little bit of loss of definition in the car, although it's kind of hard to see through the camera. But then as I move down I can actually darken the rest of it and you can actually see the detail of the white without it glaring out. Now this one's probably too dark, it's really hard to see anything in the background on the screen anyway, but you know, you can find a compromise to see, you know, which one's going to work best for you. But everything else, it just acts like it's in auto mode. You know, when I go to take a shot, it's still going to, you know, sort out, you know, what speed and everything like that, and you know, it's just like being in auto, but you just get to have a few more functions. So I highly recommend you trying P mode, program mode. The other advantage of program for those who have digital SLRs is the ability to shoot in RAW. So you can see here, right there, it's got a RAW, which I'll talk about shortly, but if I change my camera over here on this side, it's got the green box, which is its version of auto. Watch what happens to this RAW indicator when I change it. It goes to JPEG, which is a large JPEG, that's what the L stands for. You can't shoot in RAW in that mode, and it's just in full auto, ISO's in auto and everything like that. Whereas you want it back into program, now I can shoot in RAW again. So for digital SLR owners, there's quite a bit of appeal in shooting in RAW. Last thing I want to talk about quickly is ISO. So if I choose that, it brings up my ISO down here, and I can change it from 100, I can put it on auto, I can go to 100, and I can take it all the way up to some crazy number. Modern digital SLRs can do far more than that, but ISO is how sensitive the sensor is. So if you're out there shooting on a bright white car in sunlight at ISO 800, it's going to be bright. Like the sensor is so sensitive that almost as soon as you take a photo, it's just overwhelmed with light and you're getting a lot of glare and stuff. So if you're on auto ISO, which some of you probably use, it should automatically select ISO 100 or 200. It should recognize that there's a lot of light there. If you're doing it manually, like I never use auto ISO, but I'd be shooting on ISO 100, which is the least sensitive that this sensor goes. There's nothing below it, or 200. But if it's really, really bright, put it on ISO 100. Makes the sensor the least sensitive that it can be, and go from there. If you're not that comfortable with using ISO, auto ISO should sort it out. Just make sure that you haven't been at a wedding or something and turned your ISO right up to like 800 because you're shooting indoors or something. If your camera's stuck on like ISO 800, like you're not letting it go back down, you're going to have problems. That's about it for that. So on a digital SLR, again, you can see you're over and under exposure there. So with the camera set to use the thumb wheel here, so there's 3 modes for this camera. There's on, off, and using the thumb wheel. If you use a thumb wheel, tap the trigger to tell the camera that you're ready to take a photo, and then you can wind that up and down there for your over and under exposure, and then I'll show you what all the different photos look like. This is still helpful whether you're on overexposing and underexposing a photo is still helpful regardless of whether you're using a digital SLR like this one or whether we're using a little point and shoot. That's going to help people who can't afford a circular polarizer, and even if you can afford a circular polarizer, you still may choose to underexpose it slightly, just to avoid that glare situation depending on how bad it is. So photographing swirls on cars, especially light coloured cars, can be fairly difficult, but some of this can be alleviated by the correct positioning of lighting. So for instance here, I'm in my garage, I've got overhead fluoros and whatnot, and look at the paint, and you know, I'll zoom in on it, and it looks pretty good, but it's not. I haven't even started the correction on this car yet, I've only decontaminated it. So, you know, part of the problem with trying to get, you know, good pictures of swirls, part of it can be, you know, having poor lighting. I always find that the best way to highlight the swirls is to put the lights behind on the opposite side of the car from where you're shooting. So I'll turn these lights on, And now we'll come down over here, and now we'll zoom in, and then we can start to see the damage a little more clearly. Now already the camera is struggling a little bit to focus on our swirls. So if we move over here where the swirls are quite bad, it could probably get a better focus. But yeah, it's struggling already. And the reason for that is a very, very simple principle where cameras focus on contrast. Okay, so any camera, whether it's a cheap point and shoot or an expensive digital SLR, is focusing on contrast. So if I go over to the wipers, it should be able to find some focus. So now it's finding the contrast of the black wipers and the white car, and we've got some pretty decent contrast going on and some focus. So come back to the paint, and there's not a lot of contrast for it to focus on. In fact, the greatest contrast is between the lights and the bonnet. So it's going to try and focus on the lights, but the problem with focusing on the lights is that that's not the focal point for the swirls. You know, if we focus on the lights, the swirls might be bad enough that you can still see them when we focus on the lights, but that's not what we want. You know, we want to see what swirls are on the surface of the paint. So whenever I'm on the forums and I see pictures of perfectly in focus lights, I know that that's not a true indication of the quality of the paint or the condition of the paint, because if I can see focus on the lights, it's not focused on swirls. And if you defocus on swirls enough, you can actually make them disappear. So how do we fix this? You know, some people like to manually focus their cameras, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I do that sometimes. It's not always an option for people though, so I want to show you something, a little something that I've put together that could help you out. And it's pretty much free. So I'll just put this onto a tripod.